So we're up to Daf Kuf Tes Vav, and we're up to Ella Omar Rav Chizda, which we saw yesterday, but let's go over it again. Meikara. Okay, so we're talking about a case where he only has Chazeres for Tibul Rishon, and Mevarach Alei Bari Pri Adama V'al Achilas Mor. He makes both brachos, the Birchas Hanenim of Bari Pri Adama and the Birchas HaMitzvah of Al Achilas Mor V'Achila on the first Tibul. Ulabasof, and for Tibul Sheni, Achil Achilas Chasa Yitz Chazeres below bracha without any bracha. Now we had a long discussion about the Birchas Hanenim and whether or not we could bridge from the first Tibul and the Bar Pri Adama on the original Achila of Chazeres to the second Achila of Chazeres, or shall we consider that the second Tibul is integrated into the Seuda and therefore the Hamotzi patters him up from a bracha on the Yerek, on the Chazeres. And as far as Achilas Mor is concerned, what we had was Tosfos' analysis of Rav Chizda, according to which Rav Chizda holds mitzvos tzrichos kavana. It's like a mitzvah tzrichos kavana, and therefore he wasn't yotzei with the first tibul, his mitzvah of moror, but nevertheless he delays the bracha. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to get myself my feet on the ground. So again, if mitzvah srichas kavani was not yotzei with the first tibul, and yet he makes a bracha of al achilas mor on the first tibul, and we were trying very hard to figure out why that's so. And Tosfos just gave us two clues. One clue was that me'acher shachal mimenu b'tibul rishon is he should make the bracha on the tibul rishon because he ate the moror from the tibul rishon. We try to call it a ma'aseh mitzvah, even though he wasn't yotzei the mitzvah because mitzvah tzrichas kavana. And the second clue was from from Shofar, that even though he's not going to fulfill his perfect ideal mitzvah of Shofar until he gets the Tkiyos the Ma'uma, nevertheless he makes the bracha on Tkiyos the Miyusha. So that's what we discussed. And then we discussed the possibility of Hamotzi pattering him up from the bracha on Morar in the Tibul Sheni. And Tosfos made a big deal about Parperes HaPas, which is the language of the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. And Tosfos has a theory that a Yerek is Megares HaChilah. It's considered part of the Suda because it's like an appetizer. It gives you an appetite. Mamshichim ha'achila. And it was very common in those days that during the course of the meal, they would bring out yerokos, and by eating those vegetables, they would have more of a taiva for achila. And Tosfos says, so we're now in Tosfos Dimaskal V'Hodar Achil Chasa Below Bracha. And let's say we're about halfway through the Tosfos, and Tosfos says, "Ulakach potar esapar peretz." The hamotzi on the pas, pat is the moror, lefisha bolit sorech, because the yerek, in this case chazeres, will be considered part of the suda. Shayidei kach ochel yosef, because by eating the moror, which again sounds a little bit strange to my ears anyway, he will be able to increase his appetite, and that makes it into part of the suda. The ein lomar de parperes hainu dover shebol lafes boas apas. Tosfos now opens up another possibility in explaining the word parperes, and that is that it is something that accompanies the pas. Dover shebol lafes bo esapas. So I'm going to read to you what he says here in the biur. He says, "Avol davar she'eno nechal imapas, avol bishagorim atavos, is enapas potroso." So Tosfos is rejecting the following alternative pshat, that which is not eaten with a pas is, even though it does have the element of being gora the taiva, it increases the appetite, would not be niftar al yidei hamotzi on the pas. So now he's rejecting all this. So we're in the brackets, and then there's a minus sign. So in the brackets, he's suggesting that you need two conditions to be met in order for the hamotzi to pati you up. One is that it's magar the taiva, and that you can certainly check off in the case of chazeres. But number two, you need something that is nechal imapas. Says Tosfos that if you require nechal imapas as your definition of parperes hapas in order for the hamotzi to cover it, then morar is not nechal imapas. And therefore you would need a separate bracha on the morar. We saw here in Rav Chizda that his bracha on the morar before the suda is on tibul rishon, but there's no bracha on tibul sheni. And Tosfos is asking, well, if you're going to maintain that in order for the hamotzi to pater up the bar pri adam, the birchas hanenim on the morar, which he eats after the matzah, then it's got to be something that's lelafes boas hapas. It accompanies the bread, which it doesn't do. The havi b'chlal hadiktani hasam. So now he's quoting the Mishnah in Brachos. In Periketza Mevarchim Daf Mem Beis, the Mevarch ala Iker Upoter Satfela. So that which accompanies the pas is called tfela. There's ikar and there's tofer. So the matzah is ikar, or the lechem is ikar, and then that which you eat together with the lechem is tofer. And the bracha on the ikar covers the tofel. So let's say, for example, you would eat, let's say, avocado on a piece of bread. So you'd make hamotzi on the piece of bread. That's the ikar. And then you don't need a bracha on the avocado, which you spread on the bread, which is called the tofel. And Tosfos claims that halacha of ikar and tofel would not apply to chazeres. Chazeres is not a tofel to the matzah that he eats, because he's obligated in both matzah and in chazeres. So therefore, Tosfos says you must assume that harperes hapas does not require that it be a tofel to the pas, or what we call nechalim hapas, but rather it is megara the type. It just is an appetizer. That's enough to give it, to integrate it into the seuda, such that the hamotzi is a bracha on the entire seuda and anything that's part of the seuda, including chazeres. Then he says, Ka'amar nami Rabbi Chia, pas poteres kol mini machol. That the bracha on the pas will cover any kind of food, and it would seem to be any kind of food, even if it's not l'lafes bos pas. It's not something that's eaten together with the pas. The Rav Papa nami posik hosem hilchusa dvarim aboim b'toch hasuda machmas hasuda v'hainu parperes kidaprishis einam tu nebracha lo lifneim v'lo lachreim. So you see, the Rav Papa is talking about haboim b'toch hasuda. He doesn't mention anything about about nechal im pas. He just says it's b'toch hasuda. It's part of the suda. If it's shalom achmas hasuda, b'toch hasuda, there's certain things that they're not considered things that you eat in order to fill yourself up, which is the suda, but rather, he gives examples, kagon te'enim v'anovim, te'enim borim la'amshich ha'machol below lafos el l'tainim. So if you want to enjoy grapes or dates, you require a separate bracha, because these are not dvarim aboim machmas hasuda, and certainly it's not l'lafes bos hapas. So none of the conditions that would allow the hamotzi to pata you up in the case of grapes and so forth would apply, and therefore tzrichen bracha lifneim. Okay, we'll see about the birkas hamazon. That could cover everything, but as far as these fruits that you like a dessert, that's not for machmas hasuda, and it's not l'lafes bos hapas, and it requires its own bracha. Mara does not require its own bracha, even though it's not l'lafes bos hapas, but it does come under the law and the category of yerakos that are megara the type, and therefore it's ba machmas hasuda. So the question is not whether you have to make a bracha on chazeres. The question is why you don't have to make a bracha on chazeres. But it's a basic assumption, a premise that you don't have to make a bracha on the chazeres. You can argue why you don't have to make a bracha. And if you're going to say that the bracha on the pas is up the tafel, which is a davar ba machma im alechem, that doesn't apply in the case of chazeres. The reason why chazeres doesn't require its own bracha is a different reason. And that's because it's megares hatayva. The lolachreim, Tosfos says that after you eat these fruits like grapes and dates, you don't have to make a bracha achrona. And it means that Birkas Hamazon, at the end of the Suda, patters up everything. So now we have a broader definition of Seuda. There are two definitions of Seuda. Paradoxically, they're different one from the other, yet they're both correct. One definition of the Seuda will exclude that which you eat l'shem tainu, like grapes and dates in those examples. So that definition of Seuda will exclude that which you eat l'shem tainu. It's not part of the basic Seuda because it's not there to fill you up. It's a dessert, you eat it because it's pleasant, it's enjoyable to eat it. But yet now we have another definition of Seuda. And the second definition of the Seuda relates to Birchas Hamazon, meaning the bracha achrona, not to the bracha rishona. So from the perspective of bracha rishona, you're going to have to make a separate bracha on dates and grapes because they're not part of the Seuda. But yet they are part of the Seuda as far as bracha achrona is concerned. So you'll require a bracha rishona, lifanel, and not a bracha lachrel. It's really interesting. Like, let's say you were giving a quiz on Hilchos Brachos to, high school, young children. Or let's say I woke you up in the middle of the night and I said to you, give me a case of something that's not part of the Seuda, requires its own bracha, and yet it is part of the Seuda, and it doesn't require bracha achrona, it's part of the Seuda, and Birkas Hamazon covers it. You'd be very hard pressed to come up with an answer to that question, because it's almost like a stira minei ubei, to argue that it's part of the Seuda, it's not part of the Seuda, both at the same time. How can you say such a thing? But here we have it, an example of something that's not part of the Seuda, because it's eaten l'shem tainu, and therefore it requires its own bracha, and the hamotzi doesn't cover it. But yet it is part of the Seuda when you get to Birkas Hamazon, and the Birkas Hamazon will include, it means that, there's a narrow definition of Seuda and a broad definition of Seuda. With regard to bracha rishona, to say that one bracha patas another, there we need a narrow definition of Seuda. And that means that which you eat for the purpose of filling yourself up and getting whatever you need for a meal. Hopefully, if you're eating healthy, get the right nutrients, the right vitamins, the right calories, number of calories that'll keep your body going. That's one definition of Seuda. You add something to eat because it's, it's a sukarya, something sweet at the end of the meal. That's not part of the Seuda. The hamotzi will not cover it, because the hamotzi is part of that definition of Seuda, which fills you up. Now we get to a different definition of Seuda, a broader definition of Seuda. And that's the definition that operates in a bracha achrona. As far as Birkas Hamazon is concerned, anything that came post breaking bread, meaning after you establish the Seuda, any achila could be included under Birkas Hamazon. Now I'm wondering if there are Rishonim who might disagree here. Let's see. Let's just see if there's anything here. No. There's another Shita Rishonim he points out in the note here, but that has to do with something that's lafes boas hapas. And apparently Rashi's Shita is that when Rav Chizda speaks about Dvarim, or Rav Papa speaks about Dvarim aboim mitoch hasuda, machmas hasuda, he's talking about Dvarim lafes boas hapas. Now, achar asuda, afilu parperes to unim bracha bein lifneim bein lachrein. Well, this is a gewaltige chiddush, because I thought that the te'enim and the anavim that were mentioned earlier, which are included under the Birkas Hamazon, that was a dessert. No. He's saying that a dessert requires not only a bracha lefanea, but it calls a bracha lachreah. So imagine I bring out a piece of apple pie at the end of the meal. You would have to make an ala michya as a bracha achrona in addition to the bracha rishona of bar minei mizonos. Yeah, we have an issue about whether or not you have to make a bracha on the dessert. It's a big issue. I don't know what your minig is. My father raised me that we do make a bracha on the dessert. I don't know. The others say you don't make a bracha, whatever it is. But now we're postulating that not only do you have to make a bracha rishona, you'll need a separate bracha achrona on that piece of cake that you ate at the dessert after the meal was finished. You finished your meal. You're no longer eating bread. Clear off all the bread from the table. The meal is end. It is finito. It's gone. It's finished. And now we bring out a dessert. You're going to have to make a bracha achrona on that dessert. That's what I see here in Tosu. Achar asuda, afilu parperes, to unim bracha bein lefnehem ubein lachreya. The pasa is gone. It's no longer a factor. And the bracha achrona of hamotz of hazanis hakol, hazanis olam kulo b'tuvo, that bracha has to be related somehow to the pas. And it doesn't mean that I'm continuing to eat the pas, but the pas is on the table, so to speak. And I'm still involved in something that is part of the Suda. Once I finish with my pas, what I eat is a separate entity. It's a brand new achila, which is mechayev two brachas, a bracha lefanea and a bracha lachreah. So imagine a case, if you could have a case of two sudos. So a man eats two sudos, and each suda is a separate entity. He would have to make birkas hamazon on each suda. So once again, I'm going to quiz a child, wake him up in the middle of the night and ask him, where do you have a case? We have two birkas hamazon, one after the other. And Tosa is going to say that if you have a dessert which is served after the meal is over, in other words, the pasta is off the table, you will need two brachas. It's like you ate a suda within a suda. Wild. I mean, at least from my perspective. Okay. So again, that's a very important chiddush here in Tosfos. I mean, we could look it up in the poskim. But Rabbi Yosef Tova Elam, he was one of the great Paitanim. A lot of the famous piyutim. How come I can't fix this? No, got to be exact. Perfect. Okay. Anyway, so he writes a lot of the piyut that we have. He's one of the Balei Tosfos. Very often Tosfos quotes him to learn and derive halachic conclusions. So he has a siddur, and in his siddur, he has piyutim for Shabbos Hagadol. Not this Shabbos, but the one after. And in his piyut, which is published in his siddur, Lama Shar Yerakos Boin Tchilu. Why do we eat a yerek, tchila, what we call tibul rishon? And he answers, liftar chazeres mi bracha ru'ila. So that the chazeres that eats later will not require its own bar priyadama. So the two questions we want to ask, number one is, why should we set up a bracha before the meal to pater him up for the bracha on Maror? Let him make a bracha on the Maror and fire to Genesa. So he has a footnote here in which he quotes Rabbi Yosef Tov Elam in its full length, unabridged version. The Lama Shar Yerakos Bon Tchila, Liftar Chazeres Shel Mitzvah Bracha Re'uyala. I guess Bracha Re'uyala is a reference to Bar Pri Adam. She'ein Lomer Shtei Brachas Ka'achas. What's going on over here? I think he's assuming Rav Huna. I don't know. Let me just try to work this out. Rav Huna was the one who said that you split the two brachas. The bracha bar pri adam is on the first tibul, and the bracha of al achilas mar is on the second tibul. Now he's saying that we have to avoid at all costs making both brachas on the second tibul. And how do we do that? By eating a yerek for the first tibul. He seems to be, by the way, oblivious to the whole issue of hekera. But the first tibul is to set up a bracha that will pater up the maror so that you don't have two brachas on the maror. Now he adds here shtio achila, which I don't know exactly what he means here. The efshal lecho v'lishtos ki achas v'shekvar kreso mole. There's a lot of very difficult language here. He writes here, Bir dvar, keva shetzorch levarach al amar shtei brachas al achilas mar bar pri adama. Ein mevarchim shtei brachas al achilas achas. We don't make two brachas on one achila. Which is very strange because in matzah, that's exactly what we do. We make two brachas on it, and then we add a shatiyanim to boot. The ein osim mitzvahs chavilas. Lachain, on the next page, he says, Ochlim Yerakos b'tibul rishon, levarch aleim bar pri adam, v'liftar atibul hasheni. V'dafka shar Yerakos lo mara. Because then it's going to be like Rav Chizda. So why doesn't Rav Chizda have a problem of ein osim mitzvahs chavilas? He requires both brachos on the first table. Velesa. So let's see why Tosfos rejects Rav Yosef Tuva Elam. The Hamishum Akera Ba'im. We need the Tibul Rishon Fakera. This was a Gemara on Daf Kuf Yudalin Amid Beis. So how can you tell me, Rav Yosef Tuva Elam, that you need a bracha on Tibul Rishon in order to set up a bar pri adama to cover the chazeres? It's not true. The reason why you need Tibul Rishon is not as an excuse to make a bracha, but rather for hakera. That's what we pointed out before we saw this, that Rabbi Yosef Tuva Elam seems to be totally oblivious, ignoring the halacha of hakera. And furthermore, says Tosfos, that's what we saw before, that Rabbi Yosef Tuva Elam was bothered rejecting the possibility of two brachos on the second tibul, because that would be chavilos. You're packaging up mitzvahs. He says, when do we apply this principle of chavilos? That's only ela b'trei mili. You have two separate mitzvahs, right? You have Kiddush and Birkas Hamazon. Aval hacha she'ein ela mitzvah achas. What does he mean by mitzvah achas? I don't get it. Maybe he means that, as we discussed on many occasions, that maror is a symbol of maru es chayeyem, right? Which is Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. It's part of the Sipur, and the Shnei Tibulim, to arouse the curiosity of the child, so he'll ask questions, and then you'll fulfill Vigadat Lebincha, the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. So in that sense, if the second Tibul is Lakera, and at the same time it's for the mitzvah of Maror, both mitzvahs are really two sides of the same coin, and they can be integrated into one whole, and therefore there's no problem chavilos. Chavilos, like in the case of Birkas Hamazon and Kiddush, would be an overlap on one cost of two separate mitzvahs. And that's chavilos. But I'm not sure why he doesn't mention Rav Chizda. Maybe now he's going to mention Rav Chizda. Let's see. He says, the Rav Chizda mevarch shteim achazeres. Oh, very good. Here's our question. Rav Chizda's shita is that if all he has is chazeres for Tibul Rishon, he will recite both brachos on Tibul Rishon, which we found very challenging, because Tosfos insists that according to Rav Chizda, mitzvah tzrichas kavana, and therefore he wasn't yotzei with the first Tibul, but he makes the bracha al chizmar on the right, but he makes the bracha on the first Tibul, right? So he has two brachas on the first Tibul. Wait, let's just think about this for a second. And for some reason, I'm trying to think of the constructor of Yosef Tuva Elam in the case of Tibul Sheni, we have a problem of two brachos, but not in the case of Tibul Rishon. Why would there be a difference? Tibul Sheni is what? Tibul Rishon. I sense that the answer to this question lies in the fact that his real mitzvah is, according to Rav Chisda, is in the second tibul. That's when he's really fulfilling the mitzvah of Mara, because Rav Chisda holds mitzvah srichas kavod. So there's no problem of chavilos, because really the bracha that he's making on the Mara of the first tibul, I mean the alachilas Mara I'm talking about, that really bridges to the second tibul. It's really a bracha on the second tibul. There's some sort of halacha which Rav Chisda applies, which is lachar shamila kreisel man. He does the mechanical act of achilas mara in the first tibul because he has no other yerek, but that's not the mitzvah of mara. It requires the bracha at that point. It's just a halacha of kedimas habracha, and we're going to be makdim the bracha that really belongs to Tibul Sheni, to Tibul Rishon. But you can't do that with a Bori Priyadama on the Achilas mitzvah, because that's really an overlap of two different mitzvahs. One is Lashem Aretz Umaloa, you have to give due recognition to God for creating something that you're going to benefit from and you're going to eat it. So for that Hana, you require a bracha. So that bracha is a mitzvah of Hana, Birchas Hana, and then at the same time, you are fulfilling another mitzvah of a Birchas HaMitzvah. And here's where Rav Yosef Tuvelim says that we have a problem of an overlap of two mitzvahs. But in Tibul Rishon of Rav Chisda, there the bracha on the Mara is really going on the second Achilas Mara. It's only a trick of the eye that he recites the bracha before the Tibul Rishon. But Al Pidin, that bracha of Al Achilas Mara that he recites on Tibul Rishon is really on the second Tibul. Because we're holding, according to Rav Chisda, mitzvah srichas kavana. So he's not yotzei the mitzvah of Mara with the first tibul, but rather the second tibul, and therefore the bracha of Al-Chilas Mara is really on the first tibul. There's a technical reason why he makes the bracha before the first tibul, but that's a technicality. In the Chalos Din bracha and the mitzvah bracha, I'll give you an example. Here's an example. What happens, according to Rav Chisda, if he recited two brachas on Chazeres in the first tibul, and he can't find any Chazeres for the second tibul? The cat ate up all his Chazeres. His bracha of Al Achilas Mara, Igloi Milsum Afreya, was a bracha of Atol. That bracha that he's reciting on the first tibul of Chazeres has to be related to the second tibul. If the second tibul never materializes, then the bracha is a bracha of Atol. So we see clearly that the bracha of Tibul Rishon of Al Achilas Mara is related to the second tibul, to the Achilas Mara later on, because mitzvah srichas kavana. Here, there's no problem of chavilos. But l'chatchila to set up two brachos on one mitzvah, like in the case of Tibul Sheni, well, let's say, that according to Rav Huna, we're going to postpone the Birchas HaMitzvah on Achilas Mara until the second Tibul. Says Rav Yossi Tuvelim, set up the first Tibul in order that the Birchas HaNenim of Bor Pri Adama should not be simultaneous with the bracha of Achilas Mara when he gets to the second Tibul. Which is a whole new pshat in Rav Huna. Right, let's go back and read the words of Rav Huna on Kufiyat Dalet Amud Beis and teach them according to Rav Yosef Tuvela. Amar Rav Huna Mevarch Meikara. Meikara means Tibul Rishon. Amara Bor Pri Adama. V'yachil Uvasof Mevarch Alea Al Achilas Mar V'yachil. Why is he eating the first Tibul of Chazeres with a bracha Bor Pri Adama? Says Rav Yosef Tuvel, because otherwise he's going to have to make two brachas on the Mara and Tibul Sheni, and that's unacceptable. That's Chavilus Chavil. I mean, my whole question is, what do I do with matzah? So, I'm going to give a technical answer here. You'll probably reject it, but how many matzahs do we put on the table on the night of the Seder? 3 matzah. Okay, so 1 matzah is broken, and we'll put half of it for the afikomen. All right, I'm not going to talk about that. But let me talk to you about 2 brachos. One is hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and one is al achilas matzah. I'm going to tell you that those 2 brachos are chal on 2 different matzahs. What do I mean? On the broken matzah, he makes al achilas matzah. Why? Because the Torah calls matzah lechem oni, and ma darko shalani beprusa. You need a broken matzah like a prusa. That makes it into lechem oni. On that, he will make a bracha of al achilas matzah. On the 2 shlemos, he'll make a bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So there's no chavilus. Chavilus is not the simultaneity of 2 mitzvahs, but when one chefta is being used for 2 different mitzvahs. You have a kos yayin, you want to use it for Birkas Hamazon and for Kiddush. That's a no-no. That's chavilus. But in this case, you have 2 matzahs, and that's why I think it says in the Haggadah that he should that he takes the shlemus, but then he drops one of the shlemus, I think it says, right? So, but when he drops one of the shlemos, what he's going to do is he's going to make a bracha of al achilas matzah on the prusa. Now, you might ask me, if that be the case, he should drop both of the prusos. I'm sorry, both of the shlemos. But let me just no, of course, I don't know where I put my Haggadah now. I took it out yesterday. Anybody have Haggadah here? All right, I'm not going to waste our precious time right now and try to find out Haggadah. But I'm going to put my neck out on the line here, and I'm going to say that the hamotzi lechem min haaretz is on the shlema, one of the 2 shlemas. He'll pick and choose, and the al achilas matzah is on the prusa. And if that's the case, then I've solved my problem of chavilos. But we're back to Rav Yosef Tuvelim that says a birchas hanenim and a birchas hamitzvah both on the same object, in this case Mara, is unacceptable. So we ask the kasha, so what are we going to do with Rav Chizda? And the answer is because Rav Chizda's al achilas Mara is really on the second Mara. Although for technical reasons, he's going to preempt the bracha on the first Mara of Tibul Rishon, but it's really not Chal al Pidin on that Mara. It's really Chal on the second Mara. If you talk about having Kavana, from the beginning to the end, this would be a great example of how important it is to have in mind that when he makes the bracha of al achilus Mara on the first Tibul, which is not our minhag, but I'm saying according to Rav Chizda, then he should have in mind the Mara that he eats in the second Tibul. Okay, then Rabbi, that's where we're going to stop here. And immediately we're going to learn Masechet Sanhedrin, so I won't have a problem getting to you live. Okay, then? I thank you for that.